So let me start by saying thank you for being here and letting you know a little bit about me, and then I am going to want to know a little bit about you. So we are going to go through that. My name is Crowley, and I am the Vice President of Investor Relations at United Way of Snohomish County. I have been with United Way for a little over 16 years at this point and doing nonprofit work for about almost 25 years. 30-year resident of Snohomish County, and I have gone through a number of executive search processes, both at our United Way, and I was on the board of directors of KSCR, our community radio station, for 7 years, and actually took them through 2 executive search processes. So I have done this. And had the pleasure of working with Sari on our last executive search process that we went through. She was one of our members who joined us on the committee, and she went through the process and said, Karen, you really better train some of our folks in the community about how to do this. So that is how this came about. Let's get to work. Oh, by the way, I should tell you, the back of your heads are being recorded for this session, and this is one of the sessions that we're recording. I think it's the only one that we're actually recording from this event. So let me tell you what my objectives are for you, and we will definitely get to those questions. I want to work with you on just a very simple process overview and flow. And if you work at Boeing, you've certainly seen flow charts. But just what is a really clean flow of what this process really should look like, a successful process. How to, as you look at this, build a plan that actually works for you. And I'm going to give you some tips and tools. And I actually have a handout and I have some reference materials as well. And so hopefully they'll be helpful for you. The other thing I want to tell you when all is said and done is that there is a terrific process that United Way has that is a full guide. And if you are interested and want to know more, if you will give me your business card, I am happy to send this to you as a PDF because it really, you could pick this up, walk out the door and say you've got what you need. So I'm really happy to do that for you. So I want to start by taking you through really just a very simple process that I have seen used 4 separate times and works every time. And the trick within it, of course, is how you make this personal to your organization. And this is going to sound pretty basic, but the place that you start always, and I'm going to run through this just fundamentally, then we're going to unpack it a little bit. So first thing you're really going to want to do is build your search committee. Who is the team that's going to be responsible for making this happen? Clearly, that team is going to be responsible, that committee, for then, and I'm going to give this to you in a handout, so you don't have to write this down. I'm going to run through this and I'm going to give you a handout, and it's going to be all there for you. That committee is going to be responsible for creating their plan. They're going to be the ones who are responsible for posting the job opening. They're going to be screening initial set of candidates and doing a first interview process. This might be something that surprises you, but I am recommending, in the successful processes that I've been through, that committee is going to be responsible for actually building an interview team, and it's going to be a potentially slightly different and expanded interview team that's really going to take your final set of candidates through an interview process. They're going to assess and recommend. They're going to report to the board. You're going to hire and celebrate. That's it. We're done. That's all it is that you need to know. As you can imagine, there's more to it than that. So I'm going to give you, this is sort of an expanded version of the process, and we're going to go through not all of this, but this also includes some tips and tools for you that I hope are going to be useful. There you go. So let's walk through this just a little bit, and I want to highlight some of the pieces that I think really do matter and are significant. If you've been through a search process at all, you know that one of the first pieces that is critical to you is putting the right people at the table that are going to be the ones to guide this process. And your board chair has really the significant responsibility of making sure that they assign and choose a chair of this committee who is experienced in the organization, and I would suggest, even more importantly, really experienced with group dynamics and community processes. It's the most important thing. If you take nothing else away from this, know that when you are hiring a leader for a community-based organization, the most important thing that you can do is make sure that you have made allowances for all of the voices that really need to be included in this process. And whoever it is that is leading your search committee understands what a community process looks like and understands that it is messy. It has the potential to be messy. So the first thing that truly does matter is building your committee. And before you ever get to work then, asking the next set of questions, which really is, what do we need? What really is it that this organization needs from our leader? And I would suggest that that's not quite as simple as just saying, I have a job description. If the board is doing its job right, they'd ask some really good strategic questions about what is the direction of this organization, what is it going to take for the next leader to come in and take us where we want to go, what are the skills and competencies that that person really needs to have, and then how we're going to find that person. But getting very, very clear on what you need, and it may be that the board doesn't know that completely. It may be that if you're a community-based organization, you might be needing additional input on answering that question right up front. So this first step of building the search committee is absolutely critical. Think broadly and get the right people at the table, and I really want to recommend that you maybe think beyond the board. When we built the search committee for KSER, we were hiring a station manager, we really said, what other voices do we need? And we literally reached out into the community and said, we need people who understand community and maybe are seeing things that we're not seeing, which is actually how Sari ended up being on the committee, because we knew we needed someone with that depth and breadth. So building the search committee is really the first step, and it will serve you so well to take some time to be extremely strategic in making that happen. I cannot emphasize that enough. And then these are the folks, of course, who are going to have full accountability for whatever happens in the process. They're going to set the budget, they're going to report back regularly to the board of directors, but these are the people that are going to guide the work, and you need a strong chair and a really strong, inclusive committee. As you then build a timeline, for any of you who have done this before, are you really aware of how long this process takes? What's your best guess on that and how long it takes? You have a cheat sheet right at the top of the page one. This is months. This is months. Months and months and months. It really, it's probably, pardon me?
I was going to say 6 months to a year. But
I think you can do it more quickly than that,
right.
and that actually can leave your organization in a real hole if you're taking that long. So it's sort of a balance of how do you have the time to do the job right, knowing that your organization has to have leadership as you go through it. So really you're looking at a 3 to 4 month process to do it well, and there's almost no way to do it any more quickly than that if you really want to be inclusive. So think about that and allow for that in your timing. Think about whether or not you need outside help. So this interesting question about finding a talented pool of candidates. Think about as you build your search committee, do you yourself have the reach that you need to actually draw in that pool of candidates? Do you know where to apply? Do you actually have any idea where to post the opening? Where's the best way to pull those candidates from? We found, and I have been on searches at which we've actually worked with a consultant. If it's industry-specific work, we actually worked with a consultant who became invaluable to us because we were doing industry work. This was in commercial, non-commercial radio. We needed someone who really understood a national pool and understood what was out there in the marketplace. So think about, it's a search committee question, do you need to bring up a consultant in who might actually have a little bit of a broader reach than you may have? If you don't have an HR professional in some way who is on staff, and often small nonprofits don't have a regular or full-time HR professional, consider on your search committee putting someone on specifically with an HR background who can really be your consultant and maybe can be the one to say, first of all, think about these issues of what's allowable and what's not, and let's think about where we can post and places that you might not even have thought of within the industry. So those two things can be critical to you. Having a consultant, and you must have someone who has HR background, at least if not on the committee, someone that is just a phone call away that you can say, I'm thinking through this, is this right, what would you add to the process? So, as you build that, And you're going to build out your budget. And I hope you're hearing that what happens before you ever do anything is you're going to get the right people at the table. You're really going to think through what it is that your organization needs. Do you have a strategic plan? As you look at your strategic plan, where are you going in the next couple of years? What does that person need? What are the skills that are needed? And are they the same skills that the current leader has? Or do you need something different? Now, as a board, you should be thinking strategically and have that sense. But it may make all the difference in the world in what you ask for, post in your job description, list as recommended skills and competencies as you reach out into the community. So you've got to answer those questions, and that's going to take time to do. And so once you've done that, and only once you've done that, and you've created your job description, and you've got the right people at the table, only then do you begin to post the actual position. Based on whatever that plan is, on wherever you need to post it. For the radio station, we posted nationally. We were working with a consultant who had a broad reach across the entire country, and that was great for us. But if you know you're going to do that, did you build into your budget dollars for having to fly somebody in, maybe to interview them, or dollars to relocate somebody if that happens? So again, you've got to think about the scope that you set for your search is going to have implications to the dollars that you budget. And you need to be letting your board of directors know, this is how much it's going to cost us, this is how much we need to set aside to do this, so let's be wise in the process. Now, let me ask, that's sort of the setup. For those of you here, is there anyone here who hasn't screened resumes and had to interview folks? Anyone here who has not done that? You've all done that. You've all had that sense of that. Okay, so you really understand that as you got a pile of resumes, your sense of what you're looking for is what makes the difference on how you cull that pile down. And so then it's going through a series of steps, and I'm not going to go through that because I figure that you know that. I'm going to have to screen, I'm going to have to get this right stack of people. But I do want to offer this to you. After you go through that, whatever that first cut is, and by the way, in your packet there's a couple of grids that you can use as reference guides to maybe think about how you might select and look at your candidates. Once you've done that, I want to suggest to you that once you've got your group of candidates, and you might have done a telephone interview, and then you might have done an in-person interview, whatever feels right for you and how many candidates you needed to screen down to, when you get to the point where you've got your final, say 3 or 4, and I would recommend no more than 4, but you've got your final 3 or 4, this is the part where it really gets interesting. Because this is the part where you may need more voices around the table, particularly if you're in a community-based organization. So think about, and I highly recommend creating an actual interview team for those final sets of candidates that is a much broader pool than just the search committee.
Should it be entirely different, or can search committee members serve on the interview?
I think that they can, and I think that they should, because you've got continuity. In the processes that I've been through, we actually had both things happen. We had search committee members who were observing the final interview, so they were there in the room, but they actually weren't helping to ask the questions, but they could take notes and they could observe it. And I've also done it where they simply sit on a committee and becomes a more expanded committee.
What about champions?
In what way, champions?
Search committee champions for the candidates.
Say more about that.
Someone in the search committee has kind of picked out a particular person they're very interested in.
Mm-hmm.
Someone else, where I work with projects, if you don't have an
Yes.
executive champion, the project doesn't go forward. So
I think that I know that what will happen with your search committee and what is key to
they don't tend
this.
to fragment.
Yeah, well, no, it can, but you have to be very clear on what the job description of that search committee is, and what their accountability is, and what their scope of responsibility is. We, in our process, were very clear in saying, you're going to come to the table, we're going to have a very structured interview process, we're going to have questions, you all know this, it's the same set of questions, always asked in the same way, in the same order, of all of your candidates. So you want a process that is actually across the board the same. And you want to let folks know that you are one piece on, if you are serving on this interview team, You're one piece in a much broader process. So that the input that you're going to hear around the table by these candidates from these answers is one piece in a much broader selection process. And so I'm going to ask for your input. And you may have folks at that table that actually are champions for a particular candidate. So you have to do some briefing with them up front saying your job is to listen to everyone equally. And you set your guidelines for what's going to happen in that room when they ask questions. And then you want to build instruments, evaluation instruments that are very specific and very detailed, and make sure you get input from everybody. And those are not going to be the folks in the end who make the recommendation. They are giving you one view that's very important. That all of that data is going to come back to the search committee, who's then going to compile it, whatever process you've created, to actually build a ranking system. And then it's going to be the search committee that's going to go back to the board and say, based on everything we've done, here's our recommendation. I have seen this process be really successful, but it requires a lot of finesse, because you have a lot of different voices around the table. And if you've done community-based processes, people come to the table with different skill sets. And that's part of what you want, but you have to manage that process really well. But I want to talk to you a little bit about what really matters then as you begin to think about those parts of building a good process. Here's a big question for you. Are you ready? I mean, if you're going to start to look for your next leader for your organization, what do you need to have? Have you in fact done that background work that says, I know the skills and the competencies that we need. We have a job description. We know what our budget is. We know how much we can pay. We know what our benefits are. We know what we're able to offer. So before you begin, your board may have some real work to do to make sure you answer those questions, and that can take time. And this is what I want to spend a little bit more time talking about right now, is the who needs to be involved. Think about this. This, what I'm going to show you next, has served me well in everything I've done on every board of directors or every community process. You actually heard Beth refer to it in one way earlier. People support what they create. People support, Beth was talking about people support your work if they believe in the work you do. But when you are building a process that is community-based, you absolutely need to know that people will support. They'll support it if they have had the opportunity to actually participate. So your stakeholders in this process really matter. And the more that at the end of the process, your key stakeholders can look back at it and say, I had a voice, you asked me for my input, my voice was heard, I know my input got considered. People who are like me or are, represent me sat around the table making this decision. I trust that that was the right decision. And if you can't say that, you might not have the support that you need when you finally go to the board and say, this is who we want to hire. So here's what I want you to think about. Stakeholders are just key. So I want you to turn 124. Okay, I just want this, just do a quick turn and talk. And I want you to turn and talk to the person next to you and think about the organization that you are representing, your board, and just take a moment to tell each other, when you think about the stakeholders in your organization, who are they? How broad is that list? If you were building this process, what stakeholders might you need to be thinking about? Go. Talk to each other. Okay, I'm gonna bring you back here.
Which one? ECU?
And I know that wasn't enough time, but I just wanted to get you thinking. So tell me very quickly, just throw out, as you're talking about this, just give me some names of stakeholder groups that you identified.
Private donors.
Private donors, so let's just say donors. Who else?
Board members.
Who else?
Clients.
Yeah.
Ah, very interesting.
I said that the agencies that we collaborate with.
Ah,
leadership agencies.
partners? Could clients also be, maybe I'm thinking of the credit union, could they be customers?
Members.
Members? Yeah, okay. Anybody else?
Totally third-party friends who are, might have, a bit of knowledge in the specific industry or not, but just
Yeah.
Third parties.
Yeah, maybe third parties who have, again, if you think about this idea of stake, who has a stake in this person that's chosen. So, yeah, I think you're right. I saw one other hand.
I do a lot of college hires, so
Yes.
schools that the students come from.
And great, oh, yeah, and so maybe that's this partners, as you think about partner list. So the list can actually get pretty broad. You think about who's going to be affected by the work that this organization does, or maybe involved going forward and working with them. Stakeholders matter. So I want to go back to that original flow chart that I showed you and just show you the places along the chart that I think it really makes sense to involve stakeholders. First step, this building and the search committee, I would suggest that this is not a place initially to involve stakeholders. This is a place to involve governance and leadership, because these are going to be the folks in the end who are going to have to make the decision and make the recommendation, who the board has accountability for it. So you may need consultants, and we talked about consultants or HR help. That's different. Those are folks that are helping the search committee do its work. But as the search committee is actually creating their plan, and maybe looking at what are the skills and competencies we need, maybe you need to rebuild a job description or think differently, that is a place that you can involve your stakeholders. When we were working at the radio station at that point, what we actually did is we put a survey out to all of our members and said, as you think about and envision the next few years at the station, what do you see as a direction that we might be going, and what do you want to see in the next station manager? What skills do you think are important? We got great input that actually informed. Now, we were the ones that built the job description, but people immediately felt from square one that you asked me, you asked my opinion. This isn't happening in secret. Okay, I like that. I'm going to be involved in this process. Just because you ask for input doesn't mean that all of it gets in, but it means that people begin to feel involved. And again, remember, I'm talking about sort of community-based organizations. So there are places in the plan where you can actually reach out, ask for input, and incorporate it. You can ask for input on, we're building our interview questions. What's the one question or two questions that you want this person to answer, that you really want to know? Give us some ideas. You will get great input. You will get great, and again, people will feel like, I wasn't there, but you know what? They asked my question. That's great. When you post the opening, your stakeholders are great people to send that opening to, right? They've got a network. Use their network, send the opening out. They will feel like, great, I see that it's posted, and you know what? I want to be sure that these people over here, I know that Joe is interested in this position. I'm going to send it on to Joe. So that's a place to include stakeholders. My suggestion is in your first screening and interviewing, that initial culling, you come back to search committee. That's their accountability. You're going to take all this in, but you're going to make those first cuts. However many they are, if it's one cut, one cut, two cuts, you're going to make those first cuts. But when you build your interview team, this is the best place to pull people in from the community. You really need to do that. And be very thoughtful. Think about the size of the team that you need. What actually can you handle and accommodate? What's reasonable to think that you can do? And if one of your stakeholders is looking at that list after the fact and saying, who made that decision? And if they see themselves in some way on that interview team, that there was maybe a representative from a partner school, somehow there was a representative from their group in some way there, you'll get a sense of saying, okay, my voice was probably heard. I trust this decision. Yes, sir?
This is from past, but I was concerned about that a little bit because stakeholders sometimes have interests and agendas, and that was a problem in one long ago. Because they were on the interview panel, they had a bias.
It can be, and so as you think about that, then I think it's a question of balance. And you look at numbers, and you say, if I'm building this team, how many voices from which stakeholders need to be on it? I think you have to be thoughtful about saying, in the end, my search committee people are going to make the decision. My board members are primary. So I think you have to watch how many folks you have on there. And then in your assessment process, build in an assessment process that maybe has a way of weighing that and judging it.
If you have stakeholders in your interview and there's two things that I see that would make me nervous about doing that. One is that the stakeholders all form an opinion of Joe, the candidate, and not Joe, the executive director, who they're going to be working with if they get this position. The second is they're going to have their favorite out of the group, and if you don't choose their favorite, they may not be willing to work with that person.
It is a challenge, and I have been in situations where that has happened. And I would suggest, but if you build a process that really has been thorough and inclusive, in the end, it will be right for the organization. And so in the end, if that, and you just have to go there, if this is a stakeholder that really cares about the institution, no matter how messy it may be at some point, particularly if what you've said at the beginning is we want change, that's where it gets really interesting. Really interesting. I would suggest though too, that's where defining roles becomes really important. And letting people who are on that interview team know you're seeing a piece of the process, not all of the process. So there's so much we can talk about here. So the assess and recommend, I think, has to come back into the search committee. Hiring and celebrating is all of your people. One of the things that I would recommend to you too, and you'll see it in your tips and tools, is that you think about, if you're a community-based organization, somewhere in the process, is there a place for them all to meet the candidates? Is there a community forum? Is there a reception? Is there a place where people who didn't sit on the team could come and meet them and in some way give feedback or input? It's really interesting to do that. And it actually can work. So tips and tools to you, make sure you clearly define roles, responsibilities, and accountabilities. In your packet, I've given you, Bowen will appreciate this, an RAA, Responsibilities, Accountabilities, and Authority document for a search committee that says, here's our scope of work, here's what we're responsible for doing, here's the range of our authority, here's what we're accountable to deliver in the end. So this is a Boeing-based document, and it works, it works, it works. It is so good. So make sure that you have all of these things clearly defined at every step of the way. And I really recommend create an inclusive process. Follow your process. Once you've set it up and everybody agrees on it, follow it and trust it. I can't say this enough. If you build a good process, it may take you from A to Z before it gets back to B, but it will work. So trust your process. Finally, don't rush this. Allow sufficient time. It's going to take you 3 to 4 months. 4 months is pretty standard, and you'll get to the right thing. Thank you so much for joining us.